Over a year until the general election, and there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of buzz, and there's some excitement on the Democratic and Republican side. So, I do think Democrats have an uphill battle here in South Carolina, but they're running in a good year. I think there's probably going to be some good year in 2014 for Democrats, in part because of some of the controversy with the Trump administration, but in part just because first-term presidents typically lose seats and struggle in that midterm election. Mostly it's talked about when it comes to the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, and so you'd expect Democrats to pick up some seats in the House and Senate nationally, but there could be an effect on the South Carolina. So whether it's James Smith or Phil Noble or some other Democrat that comes out of the woodwork, they're running in a good year. It's always tough in South Carolina for a Democrat, but I do think that 2018 could be a good year for Democrats nationally. Primary electorate is different than the general election electorate. The primary electorate on the Republican side is further to the right, and so they've got to make sure that they are able to build enough support to get into a runoff, and then if they get into a runoff, to be able to beat whoever they're in a runoff with. Obviously, this is a state where Trump is still fairly popular. He's particularly popular with Republican primary voters, and so I think you've got to be, pretty supportive of Trump, certainly not critical of any of Trump's actions. And, it's going to be about getting your name out and building your organization. And really two of the candidates, both Templeton and McMaster, have emerged as the fundraising leaders and the people who at least have the resources to mount really, really competitive campaigns. It doesn't mean that somebody else couldn't win, but those are the two right now that it looks like it's going to be between on the Republican side. Same thing on the Democratic side. And really, for the Democratic primary, it's really important to think about the role of African Americans. African Americans make up the majority of Democratic primary voters, the vast majority of Democratic primary voters. And so whether it's Noble or Smith or some other candidate, they've got to make sure that they do well in the African American community and speak to issues and concerns of the African American community, because that's a constituent. And you saw that with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Of course, it was a presidential election, but Sanders did not have the appeal among African Americans in South Carolina, and he got blown out by Hillary Clinton, who had long-standing ties in the African American community. It's a huge uphill battle for Democrats to win statewide in South Carolina right now. It's been a while since a Democrat has won statewide, and so it's going to have to be somebody who's a moderate Democrat, who is going to be somebody who probably talks about the role of government, perhaps in education or in building roads or attracting businesses, but can't be a Democrat in the spirit of Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or some kind of national Democrat. That would be, I think, a real mistake in South Carolina. It's got to be somebody who is a moderate, who can say, look, Republicans have had their chance. There's been a lot of problems in the legislature. There's been a lot of ethical challenges, and it's time to, have another voice, and somebody who, though, can work with Republicans, because, even if a Democrat were to win the governorship, it'd be likely that Republicans would still control the state legislature. McMaster was for Trump early on and was in a position as lieutenant governor, so he had, held statewide elected office. That meant a lot to Trump. But it is an interesting dynamic because McMaster is the ultimate insider. He's been in South Carolina politics for a really long time, and that can be a problem, particularly in 2018, with the continuing investigation that's going on in Columbia. And it seems like, a new person is either being indicted or resigning, almost weekly. And so somebody like Templeton, who says, yeah, I've run a statewide office, but I've never been elected. I've never been part of that system. I'm more of the Haley wing of the Republican Party. That can be a really, really effective strategy. We saw that with Nikki Haley winning both in 2010 and 2014. And certainly I think Catherine Templeton is going to be taking some plays from the Nikki Haley playbook when she runs in 2018. And so it's a huge advantage for McMaster to be an incumbent. He can take the bully pulpit. He can sort of point to some of his accomplishments while in office. But I do think that he's going to have his work cut out for him, not only with Templeton, but, again, being in a crowded field, people get split up. It's hard to win outright. And then once you get in a runoff, you don't want to be in a runoff as the governor, and so it's going to be a really, really exciting dynamic. It'll be interesting to see how much Trump comes back and participates in the campaign. He's done a fundraiser already, but will he come back and be an active participant? I think it speaks to the connections that she has and kind of how she's perceived across the state and some of the partnerships she's been able to build. I mean, she certainly is well connected and plugged in to a lot of things that are going on in the state of South Carolina, even though she's not a long-time legislator or something like that. And so, but it is a unique situation, and she's certainly a formidable candidate. She's from the Low Country. I think you've got McMaster from the middle part of the state, but to the extent that she can really draw on support from this part of the state, a part of the state where a lot of people live, I think that's going to be a big advantage for her. Yeah, definitely. It gets her attention, and it means that they're going to be, not only Templeton's going to be able to run ads, introducing herself to voters because she has not won statewide. I think she probably does need to get her name out more in the middle part of the state and in the upstate. But also, it just means that, they potentially have to prepare for some negative attacks towards McMaster that even if he's able to survive, weaken him some for a general election matchup against the Democrat. It is. I mean, we had Operation Lost Trust, several decades ago, but, this has been a huge issue. It's really impacted the Low Country here with Bobby Harrell and Jim Merrill. Some of these, we had this delegation that had these very huge influence in the legislature, and now it's a lot of new people. It's people that are out, and so and I think the legislature in South Carolina was never really super high on on people's list in terms of approval rating or anything like that, but I think it's really shaken a lot of trust in what's going on and a lot of confidence in what's going on in Columbia, and so something needs to be done, and part of the way voters can send a message is through the 2018 governor's race. I think it'll be a huge issue depending on what the economy's doing. I mean, right now the economy is doing fairly well. If there was to be an economic downturn, that could potentially be an issue. Roads have been addressed in some way, and so perhaps that'll take a little bit of a back burner. But I do think that what's going on in Columbia, certainly in the primary between Templeton and McMaster, and then you have to believe, even though if James Smith were the nominee, for example, he's in the legislature, it's certainly been more of an issue with Republicans in the legislature than it has, and obviously folks that have been affiliated with the Quins.